Good morning, everyone, and welcome to IEF's Giving Tuesday, coffee and conversation about conservation. So glad to see everybody on here today. I see a lot of familiar names and faces. Um, we're going to have this kind of flow similar to some of our conservation chats if you've been on here before with us. We'll have a speaker, and while the speaker's on, we ask you to maybe just keep your microphones on mute and your cameras off, and then we'll get to some questions. And at that time, we might ask you to turn your cameras on so we can see you, and you can maybe ask some questions directly, or you can put some in the chat while we're getting to that. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our International Elephant Foundation staff. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Julie Bates, and I'm the Donor Relations Manager at IEF, and just thrilled to see everybody here today. We also have Deborah Olson, our Executive Director, on with us today, and Sarah Conley, who our Conservation Coordinator, who I'm going to turn it over to right now, and she's going to tell you a little bit about our guest speaker. So take it away, Sarah.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. I hope you all have your coffee for weird Zoom background made my coffee disappear. So we are celebrating Giving Tuesday with coffee and conservation. We wanted to celebrate you guys and bring you into our elephant world by giving you access to some amazing experts today. And this morning we are kicking it off with a bang. We have Dr. Lauren Howard. She's an important figure in the global fight to stop elephant endotheliotropic herpesvirus. She's board certified specialist in zoological medicine, having worked at multiple prestigious facilities, including the Houston Zoo, where they worked closely with Baylor College of Medicine to better understand EEHV and to make the huge strides that we will discuss today. She's currently working at Peel Therapeutics on their exciting work with elephants and for elephants. She's a leading member of the global EEHV Advisory Group and so much more, but of course, she can tell you all about it. So let's welcome Lauren. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sarah and Julie and Deborah, and thank you for inviting me to spend the morning with you guys. And happy Giving Tuesday. I'm gonna share my screen. When Sarah asked if I had something to share about EHV this morning, I thought it would be worth. We spent a lot of time talking about what's coming next, but we haven't really thought about our history and our past as much recently. And there's a lot of folks that are new to the EHV fight, new to elephant care. So I wanted to take the next, say, 20 minutes or so to kind of give you a background and a history, because sometimes you need to know where you're coming from to appreciate how far you've come. So that's sort of the gist of today's presentation. So let me get my screen set up here. Oops, that wasn't supposed to happen. There we go. All right. So we have come very, very far in our fight against EHV. We have not completely cracked the nut, but we've made tremendous strides in understanding the virus and how to do our best to ensure our young elephants are given every opportunity to grow up. With a lot of zoo animal conditions and diseases, the hard-fought knowledge that we have learned over decades is often taken as dogma or taken for granted by our younger colleagues. So that's why it helps to start from scratch and talk about where we started and where we are now. The goal of the EEHV Advisory Group here in North America is to get to 0 EHV deaths. And we are so very close to that, but we're not quite there yet. And that's why it helps to share this information, and organizations like IEF are a huge help to helping us get there. So if there are any of you joining who are not familiar with EHV, it's the Elephant Endotheliotropic Herpesvirus. It's a herpes virus that's carried and shed by most elephants through natural biology and transmission. It can also cause acute, often fatal hemorrhagic disease in elephants with inadequate immunity, and early aggressive treatment is needed to help an elephant survive this disease. Asian and African elephants each have their own EEHVs. And we've learned so much about it since the first case in 1995. So going back to 1995, Kumari was the index case of EHV. Her sudden death initially baffled pathologists and scientists. She was living at the Smithsonian Zoo at Washington, D.C. And after she died, that initial legwork to identify the virus was led by Dr. Dick Montali, who was a veterinary zoo pathologist. And after the initial identification of inclusion bodies on histo, they had to use electron microscopy to confirm the presence of a herpes virus. It was a whole nother year of work before they eventually used PCR to identify the virus as a herpes virus and a brand new herpes virus that was very, very different from any of the known herpes viruses out there. Once they discovered that, an additional 5 deaths in Asian elephants in North America from before 1995 were identified as being due to herpes virus as well. In the first decade of our understanding of herpes virus, we had an 87% mortality rate in Asian elephants, which is understandable because we were just getting to know the disease. Dr. Laura Richmond was a second-year pathology resident at the National Zoo when Kumari died. She ended up completing a PhD on EHV under Dr. Gary Hayward, a humans herpes virologist at Johns Hopkins University. And that initial collaboration between Johns Hopkins University and the National Zoo is really set the EHV community up for a really, really strong backbone of zoo expertise, elephant expertise, and virology expertise and research. And that model is what carries us through today. And it's mirrored through the Houston Zoo and Baylor College of Medicine in Texas with a very similar relationship. In the early days, the goal of all of this was just to understand that a herpes virus existed and to let those caring for elephants know about it. So it was really just to generate awareness. We did lose 8 Asian elephants from this newly discovered virus in that first decade, including Kumari, who was the index case, and Singa and Kimba were both at the Houston Zoo, which is where I started in 2005 after my residency. But the good news is we actually, in that first decade, managed to save 2 elephants. Chandra and Doc brought us hope in 1997 and 98 when they both survived EHV. It was diagnosed by clinical signs and treated with famciclovir. So these were the first 2 elephants that were treated with famciclovir, led by Dennis Schmidt and some other brilliant elephant veterinarians as well. So both these elephants survived. Famciclovir was not generic at that time. So a single day of treatment could cost up to $1,000. So this was a good news, bad news situation in that these animals did survive, but the treatment was almost not quite cost prohibitive. So that got us through the first decade of EHV, which is really just understanding the virus and trying to get our feet under us. The second decade of EHV work saw increasing numbers of EHV survivors. Because of the success of Doc and Chandra, famciclovir was a hallmark of EHV treatment, but many treated elephants still succumb to the virus. We have this ongoing debate about if famciclovir truly does kill the virus, and because we're unable to this date to be able to grow the virus in the lab, we're not allowed to test that in a laboratory situation. So we do still use famciclovir because we don't have definitive proof it does not work. But now we're wondering if all the other treatments we've created or put together to treat elephants with EHV is what helped get them through, in addition to their innate immunity, which we are also starting to understand better. There were a lot of impactful EHV deaths in that second decade. Hansa, she was an Asian elephant on the West Coast, but she died of EHV3, which was later recognized as an African elephant disease. This is so far the only documented case of EHV skipping between Asian and African elephants, though in the early days, there was a lot of hubbub thinking that African elephants carried EHV and gave it to Asian elephants, and then Asian elephants got sick. That is completely not true, but it's what we thought in the late 90s, early 2000s. We lost Mac at Houston Zoo in 2008, and his death hit us very hard. While his death broke our hearts, ultimately it set up a juggernaut of collaboration between the Baylor College of Medicine and the Houston Zoo. And we created, with that initial collaboration, the first ever paid EHV research position. It was just a 1-year paid research position, taking up the first year of a 3-year lab animal residency program. But this was the first time we had someone fully dedicated to EHV in the lab. And that year produced a ton of understanding about the virus. So the first thing that Dr. Jeff Stanton, our researcher at the time, did was figure out how to detect EHV in trunk washes. He sorted through months and months of elephant snot to figure out the system to eliminate all the gross stuff and find the actual virus DNA in the trunk wash. When we were able to measure EHV in the trunk wash, that helped us understand much better about how elephants shed EHV and where they shed it from, and really the epidemiology of the virus. He also, with the help of course, of Dr. Ling and Dr. Hayward, created the quantitative PCR, which is much more sensitive than the conventional PCR, which could give us numbers as low as 100 instead of just a positive negative. So because we were able to get very, very low numbers, we were able to detect EHV in the blood of elephants weeks before the elephants were actually sick. So suddenly, with this information, we were able to actually detect EHV early enough when there might be time to do something about it, rather than checking our elephants' mouths twice a day to see if their tongues were blue. And that blue tongue is actually one of the last end stages of EHV. So this detection of the early viremia was huge in just pivoting on how we can keep elephants safe and detect EHV earlier. We also started to pay closer attention to the blood cells in our elephants and recognize that when elephants have early EHV in their blood cells also change. And certain like monocytes go down, neutrophils go up, that kind of thing. And why this is important is in a lot of areas where there wasn't a PCR machine, there are still smart people who understand what elephant blood looks like under a microscope. So this became helpful in areas of the world that didn't have a PCR machine, as well as in our own barns, where we could immediately look at a CBC and know if an elephant looked off or had the potential for disease while we were waiting for PCR results. So this was really pivotal to getting that early aggressive work that we wanted to do. And then through Dr. Hayward's work, we began to understand the high degree of variability of the different EHV species. And these not just species, but subtypes and strains. And because through his molecular work, we understand now that the viruses evolved with elephants for millions of years. No longer were we looking for a point source infection. Who brought this over from Asia? And no longer was the thought that African elephants gave it to Asian elephants really out there anymore. We were able to totally squash that. And most importantly, what this tells us is that life under human care was not a cause of EHV illness or death, which was another very strong feeling at that time. So in the scientific community, at least, we are really starting to understand these things. But in the public relations eye and the media, they were still several years behind. In that second decade, we really came into our own as far as additional EHV treatments beyond just famciclovir. Rectal fluids are a tremendous way to help elephants survive any number of illnesses to keep them hydrated. And as demonstrated by our Dr. Christopher Strem and his colleagues in Malaysia, you can do it anywhere. Because the elephant rectum is so absorptive, you can really help rehydrate an elephant by administering fluids rectally. And Dr. Ellen Wiedner was really the pioneer that really convinced us how amazing the elephant colon was. In addition to those rectal fluids, we also started to understand that early aggressive treatment, what was really needed to help these elephants get through this severe hemorrhagic, almost shock-like condition that EHV causes. What that meant was standing sedations almost every day, sometimes twice a day, putting IVs in to administer elephant plasma and other treatments, and often doing this before the elephant looked really sick. So this was another paradigm shift the EHV community went through, where we were treating elephants based on a lab value. Even if the elephant didn't look sick yet, we knew based on experience that that elephant would become sick. And if we could act quickly and get treatments into them, we could help them bolster them up so they could handle the worst of what EHV threw at them. So this early aggressive treatment really started to develop support and spread through the elephant barns in the US in the second decade. It didn't get all the way there, but it definitely started to spread. Another important milestone in that middle decade of EHV was Dr. Arun Zakaria, who's in Kerala in India, published a paper in 2013 that confirmed the death of wild elephants in India from EHV. So this again bolsters what we already knew, that this was a disease in elephants worldwide, that it wasn't just elephants under human care. But having Dr. Zakaria show that these wild baby elephants living in the forests of India, never under human care, never exposed to humans, were also dying from EHV. It helped us understand the global impact of the virus. So another important thing that happened in this middle decade was the EEHV Advisory Group. We're now the North American EEHV Advisory Group. We started out without a geographic identification, but because there's EEHV advisory groups in other parts of the world, we're now the North American EEHV Advisory Group. We formed in 2014. We bring together around 30 subject matter experts with a mission to reduce elephant deaths due to EHV. And our new goal, of course, is 0 EHV deaths. We have a website, ehvinfo.org. If anyone wants to know more about EHV, we have a lot of good lay public content for those just getting to understand EHV. And then we also have a lot of really solid recommendations and resources for those caring for elephants who want to know how to prepare for EHV, how to treat EHV, and how to help their neighbors treat EHV. And in 2015, the International Elephant Foundation helped to host the first EHV in Asia working group meeting in Singapore. And this was a really important meeting where we were able to bring what we learned in North America to our colleagues throughout the Asian elephant range countries, and also understand more about what they were seeing with EHV. And this map we started in 2015, and by 2019, the cases were so all over the place, we stopped keeping count so much. But this was really critical in the beginning years for us to understand who was able to diagnose EHV, who was able to treat it, how many wild elephants, how many elephants under human care, and to really get an idea of the global impact of EHV. And it wouldn't have been possible without IEF and Singapore Zoo, Wildlife Reserve Singapore, working together on that. Of the survivors in that second decade, Jade at St. Louis was the first elephant to be treated with the new antiviral ganciclovir. So that was a nice milestone. And then in 2013, Stampy, an African elephant, was the first African elephant to become really sick from EHV in the modern EHV era. He survived with a lot of care and support from the Maryland Zoo. It would be almost another decade before African elephants really started succumbing to the virus. So the early part of this middle decade was a real low point for EHV in the media, including negative press after every elephant death, which is hard enough when an elephant dies, and then to have the newspapers, at that time it was newspapers, of course, now it would be online, give you a hard time. There were lawsuits, hurtful top 10 lists by IDA. Some zoos elected to get out of elephant care altogether, but a lot of zoos and continue to persevere, spending hard-earned money on research and elephant care, while those anti-zoo groups spent their money on propaganda. So this was a really hard decade. People didn't want to talk about EHV. It was a 4-letter word, but fortunately it didn't last that long. By the end of that decade, things were starting to look up from a PR perspective. The hurtful top 10 lists continued, but local media was starting to recognize the efforts being made by these zoos to fight the virus and to care for their elephants, and were giving us an opportunity to celebrate the work. We still had a very long way to go, of course, and most zoos were still very reluctant to share their stories of EHV losses and survivors, but we were at least starting to get some local media support. And then we did get a major grant in 2013. It was our first major federal grant. through the Houston Zoo, Baylor College of Medicine, and Johns Hopkins University. And that laid the groundwork for several years of sustained benchtop work on EHV, which was really instrumental. And then now we're into the third decade. So what a decade it's been. We've kept Asian mortality below 60%, which is good, but of course our death is zero mortality, or sorry, our goal is zero mortality. And of course, none of us had planned to add African elephants to our playbook. But in 2019, we lost 3 African elephants that year. And altogether, since then, we've lost 7 African elephants to EHV in the US. There's been several more in Europe as well. And we've had multiple African elephants survive EHV viremia as well. So now, instead of just focusing on Asian elephants in this last decade, we are focusing on both Asian and African elephants. So this decade, the work we put into developing treatment ideas in the last decade has paid off, and it is now an expectation that any zoo caring for elephants, especially young elephants, is prepared. Treatments continue to be refined with new drugs, stem cells, aminocaproic acid, the ability to measure clotting through TEG machines. We have gotten really good at cross-matching elephants, which is an important step to making sure plasma donors are appropriate. And we're also looking at immune stimulants that are used in domestic animals. So there's a lot of new things going on. And while in the second decade, the idea of early aggressive treatment was just taking hold, it is firmly in place now, and it is a done deal. And anyone caring for elephants in the US at this point, at least a few people in each barn understand the importance of this. We do know that there's a lot of new folks caring for elephants, and there's a lot of new baby elephants on the way. So we're constantly working on providing resources and training for these people who are just new to the EHV fight. But at least the framework is there, and everyone who's been around really understands the importance of this. In the last few years, the ability to measure EHV antibodies has allowed us to understand a lot more deeply how the elephant's own innate immunity helps it survive EHV illness or death. And most lethal cases of EHV hemorrhagic disease are primary infections, which means the elephant didn't have the antibodies to protect it. So now, as we continue to do early identification of disease and aggressive treatment, we're also trying to understand the implications of that immunity and how to maybe bolster innate immunity. And speaking of immunity, this summer I realized the results of more than a decade of work by Baylor College of Medicine and the Houston Zoo, when the first EHV-1A mRNA vaccine was given to Tess, an adult Asian elephant at the Houston Zoo. After vaccinating several other elephants at the Houston Zoo in the initial trial, the vaccine has been given to 5 seronegative young elephants at the Fort Worth Zoo, the Rosamond Gifford Zoo, and the Cincinnati Zoo. So we'll be watching those elephants closely to see what their antibody levels do after the vaccine. The vaccine does appear safe. It's caused some very minor self-resolved swellings at the injection site. So now we want to see in elephants with no antibodies how it helps build antibodies and create immunity. And there's certainly more work to be done before it can be available to more elephants in the US, but we will get there. And this is a really, really big source of hope for those caring for Asian elephants right now, because if we can get all those young Asian elephants vaccinated for EHV, that will help tremendously in helping them to survive if they do get sick, not die, and will get us closer to zero EHV deaths. We do continue to lose elephants into this third and current decade of EHV. We know more, we're better prepared, we pull out the stops, but we still lose elephants. So there is still work to be done, and that's what the EEHV Advisory Group and groups like IEF are doing together to work together to do what we can to make sure this list doesn't get any longer. And we've had some good wins as well, and we have celebrated the elephants that have made it through, even remembering the losses that have occurred. In this current decade, there's a complete shift in public opinion. A lot of this is with social media. Zoos are comfortable sharing their experiences. They share when elephants are sick before they're even through. And what this does is garner so much public support for those caring for the elephant. So the total shift in transparency with EHV by these zoos in the cases that we're having is a really great thing, and it's helping to tell our stories and get people to understand the struggle that we're going through. Now, just a final thing about elephants in the U.S. Some of the recent population assessments that's been done on elephants under human care in the U.S. tells us that these elephant populations, both Asian and African, are not self-sustaining. And if we continue on our current rate, only about 7 zoos will have more than 3 elephants by 2050. We are already responding to this because we have I think up to 20 elephants due to be born in the next couple of years, which is great. But even if the elephants are born, EHV is still a threat. And that's one of the problems with EHV is that elephants die before they get to reproductive age, and they're not able to contribute to the next generation. So EHV is a very high priority, not just for us, but for the whole AZA Elephant Strategy Task Force and pretty much everyone caring for elephants. And that's why we're here today, to talk about that. So I just wanted to give you a little bit from my own personal journey, which is heavily entwined with IEF, actually. So for me, the personal journey with EHV started before I even realized it. In 1993, Kumari was the first elephant I ever met at the National Zoo. I grew up outside DC in Maryland. And the time I spent over the course of that year at the National Zoo is what set me on my current path in zoo medicine. And then when I landed at Houston Zoo in 2005, several decades later, just in time for that first EHV workshop at Houston, another piece slipped into place for me and EHV. A year later, I went on my first ever international conference. It was the second EHV workshop in Copenhagen in 2006, which was hosted by the International Elephant Foundation. And I was this young zoo vet. I didn't know anyone. I barely knew anything about EHV. I was just learning. And IEF really created a home for me to be amongst all these people who cared for elephants as deeply as they did, and who were working very hard to try to figure out what this virus was and how to stop it. And that's what IEF has done for me and for the EHV community, is to create opportunities for collaboration and lifelong international friendships. I saw elephants outside the US in 2008 for the first time on my first trip to Thailand, which was also an IEF sponsored workshop. Now, some of you who are there may remember that workshop had a bit of a rocky ending. We got stranded in the country due to a coup against the government, which shut down all airports for over a week. For me, I missed my daughter Annabelle's first birthday, her first steps, and her first tooth all in that week. I believe she got her efficiency from me. That's why she did all that in 1 week. So that was a bit rough, but we did get home safe. And a secret hack, if there's any new parents here, we had her birthday party a month later, and she never knew the difference. She didn't until she saw me putting this talk together last year, and she's like, "What?" So yeah, so things come up, but it worked out okay. And our family continues to have elephants in our lives, sometimes disrupting our lives. But I'm very grateful for all the experiences with all of my colleagues all over the world and in the US, and the collaborations that we've built. And most specifically, IEF has continuously over the years provided their symposia and then their sponsored EHV events before or after have helped to create these really important opportunities for global EHV collaboration, which is how we move the whole world and all care for elephants forward by working together. And this is important because what we're learning about immunity is if elephants are in smaller herds and they're not as exposed to as many viruses, they may have lower immunity over time. So as wild elephant herds are fragmented, which is happening all over the world for both groups of elephants, it is very possible that wild elephants will have decreased immunity over time and may become more and more susceptible to EHV. And that's why what we're doing in North America right now, understanding the virus and immunity and working on vaccines and serology is really important to future health of all elephants. And we've come so far, and there's still a lot to learn, of course. So this is just an example of a few of the things that we're working on. We're currently looking at how herd dynamics in the US impact EHV serology. That's ongoing. And of course, Houston Zoo and Baylor College of Medicine are continuing their vaccine trials. Really brilliant folks all over the world are working on point of care diagnostics and biomarkers. Some of us are working on African elephants and trying to catch that information up to Asian elephants. And then in these global meetings and stuff, we're starting to understand a lot more about what's going on in range countries. And of course, that's where the work is going to be in the future once we figure out better ways to do range country surveys. Yeah, I believe that is my last slide. So. Yeah, so it's just the EHV story is not just me, it's not just the advisory group, it's all of us. And it's you who sign into this and want to learn more about it and work with IEF on their initiatives. So thank you to everyone who signed up today and everyone who has supported us for our EHV work. We're very, very grateful.
Wow, Lauren, thank you. So I'm just going to read one of the comments because this encapsulates exactly what I want to say. This was a great historical overview of what we've come to learn about EHV. So important to remember where we've been to understand where we're going. And that's Chase Ledoux, who you know. But I think we all echo that. What an incredible, informative presentation. And we have some time for questions. So if everyone can throw their questions in the chat, but a couple foundational things just for people who might not know. Can you tell us what EEHV does to an elephant's body?
Sure. Yeah. So EHV is a herpes virus, and elephants carry anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 of them that we know of. And humans, all of us at any given time, also carry herpes viruses. We probably all have 4 or 5 right now. And generally, they can hang out and not cause a problem. But what we see in elephants is they can get it in their blood, which is not completely unusual. Sometimes it's at low levels. But if the elephant doesn't have the proper immune system or immunity to the virus, the blood, the amount in the blood becomes overwhelming. And then the reason it's called endothelial herpes virus is because it attacks the endothelial cells that line the blood vessels of all parts of the elephant. So it leads to bleeding, internal bleeding, and the elephant is unable to maintain its circulation. That's why ultimately we see cyanosis or blue in the tongue is an inability to transport oxygen. So the problem is elephants are giant rocks. So all this hemorrhage may be going on the inside, but from the outside, you can't tell. And they're very stoic animals. So all this stuff may be going on the inside and they may still act kind of normal on the outside, maybe just be a little bit off. So that's why being able to detect virus in the blood at low levels and watch it and see if it goes up was really key. Because what we learned is if we wait till they look sick, it's very, very hard to turn them around. But if we get them before they get sick. So it's just basically systemic hemorrhagic, almost like a shock-like syndrome. And we're actually still trying to understand the true physiology of that. Is it DIC, which is disseminated intravascular coagulation? Is it shock? And we have a bunch of really smart people that we're hopefully going to get together at the workshop this spring to try to hammer out exactly what we think is happening. So it's not a good virus.
No. So you mentioned PCR a few times. Just for anyone who's not in the lab, can you tell people quickly what PCR is and how that helps you with knowing what's going on in the blood?
Sure. Yeah. PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction. It's a molecular test that can look for the DNA of the virus. So it's done all over the place, but in order to do it, you need to have the right primers and have the right all the things that Aaron Latimer could tell you about. So it's basically a way of detecting the presence of the virus. And it can even detect dead pieces of the virus if the DNA is still there. So that's good. It's also challenging to know, like, if we see it in the trunk wash, is it live virus or dead virus? We're still trying to figure that out. But being able to, and it takes a couple of hours. It's a pretty quick test. And there are benchtop or elephant barnside test machines that can do it even quicker. So some of our colleagues are working on uh, validating those where you can actually use it in a barn or field situation. Um, yeah.
Great. Okay, so questions are rolling in, so I'll try to get through them all for you.
Sure.
Why famciclovir? And just I'll read the rest of her comment because this donor's
Oh
been
yeah, I see that.
to many of our EHV chats and chats in general, so she knows quite a bit. I'm pretty sure acyclovir was generic decades ago. In general, human herpes viruses can be grown in cell culture, so elephant herpes viruses can't. Why? And then, by the way, Jade, one of their elephants in St. Louis, just had a baby thanks to help with artificial insemination from Denver Zoo. So, yay, Denver.
Yay, Denver, and yay, St. Louis, and yay, Jade. Like I remember when Jade was sick and we were talking about how to treat her. So I almost feel like a grandma. I don't know. So famciclovir. So I've asked Dr. Dennis Schmidt, who's has a long history with IEF. He was the one who originally treated, and he used it because that's what a human virologist told him to use at the time. So in in Asia, through our friends in Thailand, they use acyclovir pretty much all the time. So I think it's more about what's available and that kind of thing. Um, so that's why we started with famciclovir. We have not really tried acyclovir in this country so much, but the reason we tried ganciclovir was Jade was because we were starting to wonder if famciclovir didn't work. Also, ganciclovir can be given IV. And so if an elephant is too sick to eat or you're worried the GI tract can't absorb the medication, sometimes giving an IV is better. And yes, it has not been for lack of trying that we haven't been able to grow the virus in culture. And Gary Hayward reminded us it took them 20 years to be able to grow human cytomegalovirus in culture. So sometimes it just takes a long time. I think part of it is our ability to get virus that we can grow, like viable virus, because anytime we know an elephant has EHV, we treat it right away, and then we collect samples, and then we take those samples and put them in the lab and try to grow it. So we might have already hindered the virus's ability to grow by treating with antivirals if they work. And it's also about being what to grow the virus on. We are getting better. We're getting better at developing elephant cells in culture, but for a long time that was a problem. So now that there's a lot of elephant induced pluripotent stem cell work and a lot of really great stuff going in the lab. I think we will be able to grow the virus in culture, and we still need to. Even though we have the vaccine developed, there's still a lot that we can learn if we can grow it in culture. So one of the goals of the advisory group that I'm hoping we can accomplish in 2025 is to collect all the information that we have about who's tried to grow the virus and how in one place, so that when someone starts doing it again, they don't reinvent the wheel. So that's definitely an ongoing thing. And if Cora has any suggestions for that, we're definitely open to it. So
Awesome. So, more questions. Um, any news on the fortified blood used on sick calves?
yeah, so what we call fortified blood is the plasma. So elephants are wonderful blood donors. We don't even give them cookies and orange juice afterwards, but I know they get some treats while they're doing it. We've pretty historically had elephants donate blood in the same size bags that humans give, the 450 ml bags. What we started doing is an hour before, or an hour or so before we collect blood, we give the donor elephant a double dose of famciclovir. And what happens in the body is the body breaks famciclovir down into penciclovir. That's the active metabolite. And what we believe happens is then when we collect blood from the elephant, all the penciclovir is in that plasma. And then if we give that fortified plasma to a sick elephant, we're giving them extra amounts of the penciclovir to help fight the virus. This is all theory. It is ripe for a student project to kind of break this down and see, in cases that fortified plasma has been given, have we seen a difference? The problem with a lot of our research around EHV treatment is that we are total kitchen sink folks. If you have a sick elephant, you do everything you can for it, whether it's data supported or not. And that's the problem with stem cells and some of the other things we do. We do it all at once. And then you have this other wild card of if the animal has antibodies of their own or not. So it's really hard to tease those all apart and see what works. But famciclovir has, a shelf life of a couple years. So we call this a way to immortalize famciclovir before it expires, and we just have to throw it out or pay to give it to back to a drug company. We'll give it to elephants and have them metabolize it, and then we'll immortalize it in the freezer. So it certainly doesn't seem to hurt, and we think it helps, but we still need a little research on that. If anyone knows students or residents who are interested on that, definitely give me a shout.
A great project for someone to take on. And that kind of dovetails into another question. Besides the vaccine that's currently being tested, are there any other proactive measures to protect elephants?
That's a great question. Thank you, Dr. Burtis. So basically the EEHV Advisory Group is the main protective measure. I think we're up to 33 subject matter experts. What's great about our group is we have veterinarians, we have elephant care specialists, we have veterinary technicians, we have researchers, virologists, and some other general elephant do-gooders like Debbie Olson. So what we're trying to do is do multiple fronts. The vaccine is certainly the most prominent part of that. And the good thing about the vaccine is it looks like it's going really well. The not so good thing about the vaccine is it's only going to help Asian elephants. This is not a vaccine for African elephants. And hopefully, if everything goes well, we'll have a vaccine for African elephants in the future. But there are at least 2, maybe 3 African viruses that we need vaccines for. So that's going to take a while. So the other thing we're trying to do is from this advisory group, we're working to make sure every institution caring for elephants has everything they absolutely need to be prepared if they have a case, and to treat a case, and to help others treat a case if their neighbor has a case. So that's one of the big pushes of the EEHV Advisory Group. We're creating a EEHV resource database on our website, which is password protected. It's a way for you to get on there and share what your institution has that you could lend to another zoo in crisis. And another zoo in crisis can get on there and see what their neighbors have. So Liz McCrae at Oklahoma City Zoo has been phenomenal putting that together, and hopefully we'll launch it soon. The other thing we're working on is preparedness packets, one-stop shopping for every institution to know where to go and who to talk to. And Daryl Hoffman and Dr. Jamie Lamdolfi are working on that, and hopefully we'll get that out by the end of the year. We've also eliminated all the passwords required on our ehvinfo.org website. So anyone can get on there and get any treatment recommendation they need. You don't have to sign up for it anymore. And then we're working on an EHV serology and herd dynamics survey. We're looking to get EHV serology results from every elephant in the US and pair that with a 15-year history of what's happened in that herd, including births, deaths, moves in, moves out, major construction, major illnesses, to try to get a better understanding of how elephants develop their own innate immunity and how we can enhance that. So that's where we're looking at. The vaccine is almost like a short-term thing. But what we want to do is create a situation where elephants have their own immunity and they don't need our vaccine. And that could lead to suggested management changes, herd sizes, et cetera, in the future. But we definitely want that to be very data supported, which is why we're doing this very intense survey. So there's a lot going on. That was
That's
probably more information than you needed. Sorry. Don't
no,
get me
that's great.
started talking about EHV.
The more we learn, the better. So yes, tell us more. Some questions about maybe educating the public. If you could talk a little bit more about what you've seen as effective strategies for sharing EHV related information with the public who may not know.
Sure. Yeah. And that one thing that, you know, let me see where to start. So back in the day, people did not want to admit is the wrong word, to even say out loud that their elephant died of EHV. But that information always got out there anyway. And then when people actually treated an elephant and survived, these institutions were very reluctant to say that as well, because they didn't want anti-elephant extremist groups coming after them in the media. So what we very intentionally and slowly did for 10 years was try to get stories out and science out, and information out. And there were some brave institutions that shared their stories early on, about getting elephants through a case. There was a shift, which I think is really helpful. Institutions used to not want to share about their EHV case until a month after it was over, because they wanted to make sure everything was okay. But a lot of those Facebook posts that I showed on my screen, those were cases that were actively happening. And in the midst of everything this institution was doing to care for this elephant, and it's a lot, it's like everything stops and all you do is take care of this elephant and the rest of the elephants 24/7. It's all consuming. Those health specialists, the elephant specialists, the PR, communications folks actually took the time to post on social media and say, we are going through this. We don't know how it's going to end. We're doing our best, and take the journey with us. And I think that really, really helped all these communities that love these elephants so much understand that, like, zoos aren't the bad guy. We're not doing this to the elephants. This is a virus that is a natural thing, and we are just trying to understand it and to kind of take the journey with the teams. And unfortunately, most of those cases ended up surviving, not all of them. But even so, I think what it helped is let people understand you know, how the elephant teams feel and how much work goes into it. And then the other aspect of that is just getting science out. If you do a Google Scholar search and you look at how many publications have been made on EHV, it's exponential, how many publications we've had in even just the last decade. And they're not all from the US by any means. Actually, Thailand is creating a huge amount of work. And even our colleagues in South Africa at Kruger National Park got a publication out about EHV being detected in healthy male African elephants in Kruger Park. And even things like that helps the lay public understand that, again, this isn't a disease we created under human care. This is a worldwide virus that has evolved with elephants, and now we have to figure out how to help elephants survive it and develop their own immunity. So it's that two-pronged social media, like getting people emotionally involved, and then it's the science and making sure that we have really, really good science, which we do. We're really fortunate to have a ton of brilliant people working on this. So
That's so true. And you're so right about sharing that human aspect, right? You don't really want to share when your child is sick, so you don't want to share when your baby elephant is sick. But these people are sleeping on the floor of the barn. They are monitoring these animals 24 hours a day, getting no sleep and no care for themselves. And the rest of the elephant community rallies around them. I know stories of people sending an effective barn or an infected barn morning coffee every morning, just to help these people, because they're going through so much while their elephants are going through so much. So I think sharing that personal story with people so they can sympathize and empathize can really make a difference. We do have some questions that I think might benefit from some foundational information. You've talked about EHV in the abstract kind of as a category. Can you talk about the different strains and how some affect Asian elephants and some affect African elephants?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the first two EHVs that we found were EHV1 and EHV2. So EHV1 is endemic in Asian elephants, and EHV2 is endemic in African elephants. So that means endemic means that's where they are most of the time. But if you have Asian and African elephants living together, they can swap and shed the virus. And despite our fears in the 90s, that doesn't usually make them sick. And then moving on along, we discovered EHV 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So there are 7 total EHVs that we have discovered. EHV1 is responsible for about 80% of, maybe even higher, of the deaths in Asian elephants. So EHV1 is the virus of biggest concern, and that's the one the vaccine is too. Now, we've also identified there's EHV1A and 1B, and 1A is more deadly than 1B. So the vaccine is actually EHV1A. The other viruses in Asian elephants is EHV4 and EHV5. Now, EHV5 has led to, I think, 1 or 2 deaths worldwide, but it has caused some illnesses, so it's not as big a concern. And EHV4, we kind of discovered last in when was that? Like 2013, 2014. And it has caused some illnesses. It's caused 1 death in the US, but it does seem to even more of a seasonally impact elephants in Thailand and India. So there's more to EHV4 than we know. Generally in the US, it doesn't seem to be that much of a clinical concern, but it is something that I think as we work with our range country folks, we want to understand more. And then on the African side, there's EHV 2, 3, 6, and 7. The initial deaths in 2019 that totally just stunned us all were all EHV3. But more recently, the first 3 were EHV3. The last 3 deaths were EHV2, and then we did lose an elephant to EHV6. And in Europe, they've lost elephants to all 3 viruses as well. So we think that EHV2 and EHV3 are more of a concern, but they're very small numbers now. So pretty much all of those viruses are high concern for African elephants. And fortunately, with Dr. Ling, Baylor College of Medicine serology, we're able to understand a lot more about what elephants have been exposed and what they're naive to and that kind of thing. So that's why African elephants are just a little trickier, because there's more viruses of concern, and we're still just trying to learn about them.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting question, and I know you're probably the perfect person for this in the chat. How many Asian and how many African elephants are currently in the United States in human care? And of that number, how many are under the age that are in the range that where EHV might be at risk for them?
Those are great questions, and I have answers because I've been working with Aaron Latimer at the National Zoo EHV Lab, and Noha Abumadi, who's a clinical professor at Cornell, and the Cornell Animal Health Diagnostic Lab to put together a research grant to help support and standardize all of our zoo-based qPCR laboratories that are out there. So I just had to look this up a month ago because the number always changes. But based on the stud book and population breeding analysis plans, there are 21 facilities holding Asian elephants with a total of 139 Asian elephants. Now that I think we've had a few births recently, so that might be slightly, so congratulations to those with births. And then on the African side, there are 28 facilities with 144 African elephants. So that we almost have the same amount of Asian and African elephants. Now, the Asian elephants, we consider 10 years and younger at risk. although we've never lost an elephant younger than 11 months. So there's definitely something to that initial newborn immunity. We have 24 at-risk elephants at 9 facilities. So that's 17% of the Asian elephants under human care in the US are at risk. And then for Africans, we've had teenagers become ill from EHV. So for Africans, we think anyone 15 and younger is at risk. And for them, we have 38 African elephants at risk in 13 facilities. So that's 26% of the African elephants in the US are at risk. So that's like 1 in every 4. So the African elephant herds are just younger. And I know we have somewhere between 15 to 20 births due between 2024 and 2026. We've just had a few lately. So all those elephants are going to filter into the at-risk category, which is what we need. We need more baby elephants on the ground. We need healthy multi-generational herds, but we also need to keep these baby elephants alive. And that's what we're doing with the EEHV Advisory Group and our work with IEF.
Exactly. Wonderful. And so I know we're talking a lot about North American, namely the United States, and the elephant population here, but can you sort of reframe it for range country elephants for everyone so everyone can see that it really is a global issue? I know you mentioned the studies in South Africa and Thailand and stuff like that, but I think this is a myth that people have that this is a captive or human care elephant problem.
Yes, for sure. And, it was really enlightening when we started. The first time we really met all our international colleagues was in Singapore in 2015. And there is a tremendous group of scientists and veterinarians in Thailand that care for elephants throughout the country. They know more about elephant health than I will ever learn. When we met with them and we first started talking about the EHV cases that we saw, what they realized in 2015 was there were a ton of elephants, young elephants that died with bloody, like from bloody disease that they diagnosed as Pasteurella. And now they were realizing was actually EHV. So EHV has been around in Thailand for a long time, just for various reasons. It wasn't fully diagnosed. So since 2015, in the last 15 or how long has that been? 10 years. Their EHV work has taken off. They have 5 or 6 diagnostic labs throughout the country. They have multiple PhD students in all these publications and all that. So like in Thailand, for instance, it is mostly elephants under human care that they're working on. But a lot of those elephants, if you've been to Thailand, they live in the forest, they breed with wild elephants, that kind of thing. But they lose about 8 or 9 baby elephants every year to EHV, even with all the research and the information that they have. Then you shift to India, where they have a much larger wild elephant population, and they have a little bit more of an ability to monitor wild elephants. And India is seeing, it feels like an uptick, but we don't have the data to actually prove it. India is seeing increasing cases in human care, but they're also seeing multiple cases in national parks from wild herds. And I don't know if it's an uptick as much of an increased awareness and diagnostics and all that. So India is the veterinarian. So it's easy to make an advisory group in the US. We all speak the same language. We're in the same, we have, we don't have countries and borders and all that kind of stuff. India is all the same country, but they have many, many different provinces and regions. So they are pulling together a EHV task force in India, and they've actually come to us for help on how did you start yours and how did you get people, working together and, kind of for a playbook. And then no, just pretty much, yeah, you name a country in Asia, and we've had a colleague from that country who's come to our meetings, Nepal, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Borneo, those adorable little Bornean elephants. There was a rash of EHV deaths last decade, and they've been really great about doing monitoring the herds throughout Borneo. So it is pretty much throughout all Asian, any pretty much country with elephants has EHV. Now Africa is a little bit different. We have not seen documented deaths due to EHV in African elephants. But as I mentioned, as these herds fragment more and more, we worry that we will start to. So knowing the baseline now, like that study in Kruger, is really, really helpful. So it is definitely a worldwide issue.
Absolutely. So we're actually coming up on time. I'm pretty sure we could probably do another hour on questions on this.
You just need to shut me up.
No, I think gauging based on the chat, everyone is loving all the information and learning a lot. And I actually can't wait to get this recording out to everyone so that even more people can learn and read about this great work. So a couple wrap up things. I know you've talked a lot about IEF's commitment to fighting EHV. One thing to mention to everyone is that when EHV was identified, our board really jumped into action and made it a funding priority. We have funded, I don't even know how many projects, but we funded Gary Hayward's research and Dr. Paul Ling's research and things like freeze-dried platelets and investigations into some of these antivirals, and right now specific EHV nanobodies, D-dimers, all kinds of things work all over the world that is directly linked to being able to have elephants in human care to give us these samples, but that will have global implications, which I'm pretty sure Lauren's talk drove home over and over again, which is fantastic. And in 2025, IEF, our biannual symposium is going to be in Fort Worth, and hopefully we're going to have an EHV meeting in conjunction with that. So if anyone is interested in learning more, you can always come to our 2025 symposium, where I'm sure we will cajole Lauren into giving at least an additional talk, if not more. So everyone, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Julie.
I just want to thank everybody for joining us today and thank all of you for loving elephants. I see so many familiar names out there. We're just thrilled to have so many people on here today for our Giving Tuesday celebration. And I want to thank Lauren for this wonderful information. If all of us could maybe turn our cameras on and give Lauren a big round of applause. It was wonderful. We learned so much. So thank you for joining us for that. And I just also want to let everybody know our next session will be this evening, and we'll be starting at 6 p.m. Central for our second half of cocktails and conservation. So that'll be happening at 6 p.m. Central, and we hope to see you all there. And I just might want to add one more thing. We have a generous donor who has donated $50,000 for a matching gift for Giving Tuesday. So if you make a gift today, it will be doubled. So thank you so much for all of you that have donated, all of you that donate throughout the year. So we just really appreciate you very much. And it's good to